Hi everybody, nice to see you all back on the channel. Thanks for coming by. Today I'm going to talk about an ex-student of mine, someone who studied Japanese with me. I say he studied Japanese with me. We must have done about 30 classes altogether. 30 hours in the context of learning a language seriously is really a very small amount of time. But that doesn't alter the fact that he did indeed study with me for some amount of time. And I thought I would talk about him today. I'm not going to mention his name for obvious reasons. I'm not in contact with him, so I can't ask for his permission to make this video. If he ever watches it, I hope he'll understand that it has been made with the best of intentions. Essentially, probably about 2.5 years ago now, I got a new Japanese student, somebody who wanted to study Japanese with me on italki. And he was British and in his 30s, and he'd worked in a completely different field basically all of his adult life, but he had developed an interest in Japanese. He was one of those people who was a bit borderline when I first spoke to him. Sometimes you can tell fairly quickly that people have the ability to learn Japanese, and that if they stick with it for long enough, which is a big if, they will get somewhere with it. And then there are other people, and you can tell within about 10 minutes that they're never going to be able to make any real progress with it. If you want to know how I make these judgments so quickly, then I can make another video about it. But anyway, this new student was borderline. He obviously wasn't particularly talented, but he wasn't the least talented person that I'd ever met. So I thought, well, maybe I can help him a bit here. Maybe we can see how this will pan out together. We did various things. We tried speaking little bits of Japanese together. I was quite disturbed by the fact that he could start sentences in Japanese, but he could never end them. For those of you who don't know, in Japanese, the verb, sometimes these verbs are adjectives. Japanese is a bit different to English like this. The verb comes at the end of the sentence, essentially. This is one of the most obvious differences between Japanese syntax and English syntax. The verb comes at the end of the sentence, and you have to do all sorts of potentially quite complex things to it to put it into the right form. This is to do with Japanese being an agglutinative language, where you take a verb and then you change it, and you change it, and you change it again sometimes, and it gets longer and more complicated. Basically, every time he got to the end of a sentence and needed to do this kind of thing, he got stuck and didn't know how to do it, which means that you can't really say anything in Japanese. And that was a bad sign, but I was trying to help him with that. Anyway, we did about 25 lessons together, something like that. And he got onto a 1-year academic program. It's not a degree, but it's still an academic program. It's like a feeder in the sense that it can feed you onto a full degree course in Japanese studies if you do well on it. He got into, perhaps I should say, one of these courses. And that meant, because it was a full-time course, he was going to have to give up work and eat into his savings to pursue this dream of his, to learn Japanese well and maybe even teach it someday. He had told me that when he was good at Japanese, he was thinking of being a Japanese teacher. You have to be quite good at a language to teach it, and there isn't necessarily that much money in teaching Japanese. I make scripts and scraps, but not that much. So I was a bit unsure about his plans, but I could see that he had his heart set on trying to introduce a real change into his life and learn Japanese and build something new for himself. Anyway, he started this course. He dropped out of sight from my perspective for a while. This was during the pandemic, and the pandemic had the most savage and unimaginable effect on all sorts of higher education programs around the world. You know, you're paying all this money and you're online, everything's online. He should have stuck with me and paid me much less money, but anyway. Eventually, after I hadn't seen him for quite a while, he popped up again. He was coming towards the end of his course. Basically, he said to me that he hadn't spoken Japanese in a while and he wanted to give it a crack. And I thought, okay, now we're gonna see how he's done. now that he's gone through most of this relatively intensive 1-year Japanese course. Before we started talking, he told me about some peculiar anxiety attack that he had had. And you can see why I don't want to name him. I don't want anyone to know who he is. He had some sort of medical problem, and he'd gone into hospital, and he had been told in no uncertain terms by the doctor that it was psychologically induced. I don't know how a doctor can say that with such a degree of confidence. But there seemed to be a consensus between them that his final exams for this Japanese course had created a hell of a lot of anxiety to the point where he had to go into hospital. And I mean a normal hospital, not a psychiatric hospital. I mean a hospital that you go to when you've got a problem in your stomach. Because I think that was how his anxiety had manifested itself. But anyway, he was fairly honest about the fact that the anxiety of the course was overwhelming him. He'd given up on the idea of getting good at Japanese, I think, on the idea of getting a different sort of job, something to do with Japanese. He was planning on going back into what he had done previously, but nonetheless, he wanted to do a bit of Japanese conversation for the first time in a while for old time's sake. Let's put it like that. Anyway, once we got through this introductory conversation in English, we started trying to speak a bit of Japanese. And maybe you can see where this is going, but I could see that he was no more capable of speaking Japanese than he had been in our earlier lessons. You know, he was essentially not capable of having a conversation, even a simple conversation. We're not talking about a sort of bottom of the barrel B1 type level here. We're talking about someone who is not functional in Japanese at all. And I just felt really bad for him. When he wanted to get onto this course, he asked me to write him a reference. And I did that, and I wrote it without saying anything false. But he sent me some of the bumf for this 1-year academic course. Yeah, some of the stuff that the course organizers were using to advertise the course. And I was quite horrified by it. Upon completing this course, students will be able to function comfortably in Japanese in a wide variety of social contexts. Oh, that's such a load of garbage, man. There is no 1-year course on earth that is justified in guaranteeing anything of the sort. It takes a hell of a long time to reach a point where you feel comfortable like that in Japanese. A year ain't enough, doesn't matter who you are. That set my alarm bells ringing. But the university offering the courses was a perfectly reputable British university. I put it down to the junk that people always say when they're offering language, well, always, not always, but the junk that people often say when they're offering language instruction of one sort or another. And I knew that he had his heart set on it. I knew that he was going to do it anyway. So I didn't say anything to try and discourage him. And to see him on the other side of this process, when he'd kind of been spat out by it, he'd spent a lot of money, he'd taken time off work, the opportunity cost of that is quite substantial. He'd obviously built up this idea of himself as being someone who would one day speak Japanese, and that was just crumbling before his eyes, obviously. I really felt for him. And I never, after the lesson finished, everything was perfectly amicable during the lesson, but after the lesson finished, I never saw or heard anything from him again, despite the fact that he booked a package of lessons. I contacted him a couple of months later to say, are you okay? Is everything all right? Because you booked this package of lessons and I haven't heard from you. Is everything all right? We can cancel these lessons if you want. And I still didn't hear anything from him, which suggested to me that, I don't know, sometimes people abandon something and they feel humiliated by their failures with it, and they just don't want to do or say anything that would reawaken any of that stuff in their heads. So you could see that he just let it slide. And I wish in retrospect that somebody had discouraged him. I wish that somebody had said to him, listen, you can't do this. You're not smart enough. You're not talented enough. It ain't going to work for you. Just stick to what you're doing and make some money. Should I have done that? Should I have discouraged him? I think about that sometimes. Maybe I should have. But what would I have said? You can't do this. You're not capable enough. You're not smart enough. It ain't for you. I've been studying languages, teaching them, speaking them, reading them, listening to them for decades. And I have a pretty good idea as to who can pull it off and who can't. Maybe I should have discouraged him, but maybe he'd have done it anyway. Do you have the right to do that when someone has set their heart on something and you don't know them that well? I didn't know him that well, I don't know. I don't know what I should have done. But I feel bad about this stuff. I feel like I could have done him a favour in some sense if I had told him, listen, this ain't for you, but I didn't do it. And this is one of the reasons why I say that discouragement has its place in language learning, and not only language learning. Discouraging people is an important and valuable activity when those people have set themselves the goal of developing complex skills that they're actually not capable of developing. Sometimes you need someone to take you to one side and whisper in your ear, listen, you can't do this. That's it really. I don't have anything clever to say. I just feel a bit bad about it because he sunk a part of himself in this whole enterprise and it didn't work out for him. And all of this BS, motivational speaking on the internet about how anyone can learn a language, anyone can learn to be fluent in Japanese. No, they can't. And for him, it really didn't work out. But there you go. Makes me feel a bit sad. I just wanted to talk about it. That's it. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. And I suppose I will see you next time. So thank you very much. Ciao, ciao. Bye-bye.